Pop stood before his closet mirror in his modest lodging near the busy waterfront of Gateport City, staring intently at his reflection. His oversized sailor hat, patched from countless nautical battles and storms at sea, perched precariously upon his messy red bowl cut. Most people assumed him bald beneath the hat because so little hair peeked out from underneath, but in truth, his fiery red locks just never cooperated. He flexed his large, muscular arms that looked comically out of place on such a skinny frame, and checked for wrinkles in his crisp white shirt. Satisfied with his appearance, he patted the magical wiffle hen perched on the small wooden table next to him. The wiffle hen clucked at him, its vibrant feathers shimmering with hints of golden flecks. This magical bird had accompanied him on all his greatest adventures across the Sailing Adventurers Guild's missions. It gave him confidence, and occasionally a desperately needed magical power-up when trouble beckoned. And trouble was always on the horizon. Today, trouble and glory would converge on the most unlikely of battlefields, a city radio station. The legendary young reporter, Billy Batson, had invited Pops to be a special guest, to regale listeners with stories of hidden treasures and monstrous foes. Pop's heart fluttered not only from the anticipation of sharing his tales but from the knowledge that tonight, on live radio, he planned to propose to Olive. The mere thought of Olive lightened his spirit. She was the most beautiful woman in the world in his eyes, sharp-witted, flirtatious in a gentle way, half Greek, half Scottish, and entirely mesmerizing. Her luscious dark red hair glimmered when the sun found it, curling just slightly at the tips. Her dark olive skin made her name especially fitting, and her radiant green eyes shone with a quiet determination that made even the hardest task seem surmountable. Indeed, she was likely off somewhere now, healing magical creatures in need. He clenched his fists, remembering the vow he made to himself, to become one of the world's greatest adventurers before he felt worthy of her heart. And yet, his love for her pressed him now to act, to claim the happiness that had always felt just out of reach. He only prayed that her healing duties for the day would finish in time for her to join him at the show. Meanwhile, across the city, Olive raced between stables and fields on the outskirts, rummaging through her backpack for the correct herbal concoction to treat a sick pixie horse. It was a small winged equine that had lost some of its magical luster after an encounter with an aggressive lesser demon. The demon itself was presumably one of Hagatha's conjurations, though no one had spotted the foul witch in these parts for a few weeks. Still, Olive didn't want to take any chances. "Hang in there," Olive murmured softly, pressing a bright pink poultice on the pixie horse's wing. She blew air gently onto the animal's muzzle and then reached for one of her special whistles. She had an entire collection of them, each tuned to a different magical frequency that various creatures responded to. With a short, high-pitched tweet, she lured the pixie horse into a tranquil state, letting her properly apply the healing mixture. She exhaled in relief as the creature's wings shimmered with returning life. She had 3 more stops before she could even consider heading toward the city's radio station. Yet, no matter how much she had to do, she refused to miss Pop's big moment. After all, she was certain he would give a spectacular interview. She even had a sneaking suspicion he was going to propose. His eyes had glimmered with excitement when he invited her to watch, and she had known him long enough to see through his attempts at hiding big surprises. Just thinking about him mustering the courage to do that on live radio made her heart flutter. Unbeknownst to them both, 2 other figures in Gateport City were also preparing for the event, with far more sinister goals. Hagatha, the ancient witch, hunched over a ratty old mirror in the cramped alcove she had claimed as her hideout. Gnarled candles oozed hot wax around her, casting flickering shadows over her robed form and messy silver hair. She peered into the mirror's murky depths and cackled softly. "I see you, my darling Pops," she cooed, her voice trembling with unnatural desire. "You're to be on that silly radio with that boy reporter, Billy Batson, and, of course, her." She spat that last word with venom, the image of Olive's face dancing across the mirror. Her glowing yellow eyes narrowed as she continued her scrying. "I'll give you the most dramatic and romantic declaration the world has ever seen. You'll understand that I'm the only woman you need." She paused, hissing in agitation, "and if that fails, my beloved, Olive will face the ultimate retribution. She will not stand in the way of our wedding." The cackling became more guttural. Hagatha's ancient mind had long been tangled in obsession and mania. Even now, she conjured illusions of how she would waltz in during the broadcast, vow her undying love, and if Pop somehow still refused, well, she had violent spells at the ready. The last witch on earth had no qualms about murdering a rival. If only he'd see reason, she thought. If only he would belong to her alone. While Hagatha prepared her dark magic, an entirely different figure was oiling steaks, polishing throwing daggers, and practicing swift strikes in the modest basement beneath the radio station. Professor Van Helsing, monster hunter, proud scion of the illustrious Van Helsing bloodline, had been hired to work security for this special broadcast. He had personally volunteered, half out of devotion to his mission, half out of envy that Pops was getting such recognition. Dressed in a long leather trench coat and carrying all manner of specialized weaponry, Van Helsing paced. His black top hat rested on a nearby crate, along with carefully arranged vials of holy water and silver stakes infused with moonlight. He paused for a moment, glaring at his reflection in a dusty, cracked handheld mirror. "Calm yourself, Professor," he whispered. "You're here for one reason, to hunt Hagatha. If the last witch on earth dares show her face to profess her twisted infatuation, you will finally slay her and rid the world of her monstrous conjurations." Yet, he felt a pang of frustration. Billy Batson's show was widely popular, bringing heroes from all corners of the globe to share their stories. Why, he wondered, couldn't the world also celebrate a monster hunter who had saved so many villages from unspeakable horrors? He recalled the cosmic horrors he had felt and how little thanks he had received. If only he could get a few moments on the radio to show the world that the Van Helsing name was still the vanguard of humanity's safety. His piercing blue eyes drifted to the stairwell leading up to the radio studio above. "Focus, Van Helsing," he admonished himself again. But part of him still craved that recognition. After all, pride ran deep in his family line. There was a final conspirator, no less dangerous, preparing a grand intrusion, the Feathermaster. Rumor had it that he was rallying his cultists in a secret hideout on the city's outskirts. Massive braziers belched thick, pungent smoke into the evening air. Feathermaster stood in the center of the ceremony, clad in a regal headdress woven from the feathers of countless magical avian species, each feather gleaned from a conquered bird, each representing a conquest of the cult's expanding dominion. His bright orange skin glowed eerily in the flickering light, and dark circles under his fanatical blue eyes made his intimidating gaze even more fearsome. "The Whiffle Hen shall be ours by day's end," he pronounced in a booming voice that echoed against the cavern walls. His followers, robed and half hypnotized, chanted in agreement. "Pops may be a brawler of note, but it is time we put an end to this game. And what better place than the heart of a live radio broadcast? The show itself shall become our stage. I will broadcast the glory of the cult to the entire world." He spread his arms wide, letting the many feathers on his headdress tremble. "We strike tonight. No mercy. We will not only seize the Whiffle Hen, but also show our might. The age of the Feathermaster is upon us. Spread the word. None shall oppose us and live." A hush fell over the cultists as the Feathermaster snapped his fingers. Instantly, his underlings moved to prepare the potions, the traps, and the caged monstrous birds they used as living weapons. The Feathermaster's quest to become the supreme ruler, his notion that the world must bow before him, that he alone was destined for divine ascendance, coursed in every breath he took. This was not just about acquiring feathers anymore, it was about unstoppable conquest. And so, each player set the stage for that fateful evening at the Gateport City radio station. When dusk finally fell, the station hummed with anticipation. Fans had gathered outside, eager to catch a glimpse of the famous boy reporter, Billy Batson, and the exotic adventurer from the Sailing Adventurers Guild. Microphones were set up in the booth, static occasionally crackling through the airwaves. Billy Batson, short and bright-eyed, darted about the studio with an almost unnatural confidence and maturity for someone his age. He tested the microphones, ensuring that the broadcast would capture every word and every nuance. But every so often, he glanced at the silhouettes gathering on the street outside. A subtle pang of anxiety flitted across his features, the type of tension only Captain Marvel might have reason to suspect. Evil lurked whenever he or his stories gained too much attention. Some vile force would inevitably attempt to put an end to the world's mightiest mortal. Billy clutched at the collar of his modest shirt, reassuring himself that if worst came to worst, he had only to shout a single word. In a side corridor, Pops arrived with the Whiffle Hen perched cheerily on his shoulder. He looked around, impressed at the bright interior of the station. The main studio had a large glass window overlooking the audience stands. Rows of chairs were set up for the lucky fans who had managed to score seats to watch the broadcast live. At the front row sat Olive, beaming at him, having finished her day's healing duties just in time. She wore a flowing green blouse and her signature backpack stuffed with potions, whistles, and bandages. Pops, feeling his heart leap at the sight of her, walked over swiftly. "You made it," he whispered, half in excitement, half in relief. "Of course," she murmured, her luscious red hair catching the overhead lights. "I wouldn't miss this for the world. But let me tell you, healing a clan of injured salamander drakes was no small feat." He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "You're amazing, Olive. Thank you." Then, taking a small step forward, He lowered his voice conspiratorially. Hey, after the interview, can I talk to you, privately? Her eyes glimmered. What could we possibly need to talk about, Mr. Sailorman? You have me on the edge of my seat already. Pops grinned sheepishly but was saved from further remark by the arrival of Billy Batson, who came bounding over. Pops. Olive. Great that you're both here. We're going live in 5 minutes. Pops, let's get you behind the microphone. Olive, you'll be right here, front row. You'll have a perfect view. Olive gave Pops an encouraging wink before taking her seat, and Billy guided Pops into the broadcast booth. A flurry of staffers and technicians hustled to ensure everything was perfect. Over by the control board, Professor Van Helsing loomed, his black top hat tilted low. He was ostensibly there as security, but every time Billy looked his way, the monster hunter gave a small cough, as if to remind Billy he was also available to be interviewed, any time, just say the word. Billy offered him a polite nod but made no promise. At the stroke of the hour, Billy's voice filled the airwaves. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen of Gateport City and beyond. You're listening to the Billy Batson Show, the most exciting radio broadcast on this side of the ocean. Tonight, we have a very special guest, an adventurer who has traveled the seas, braved monsters, and collected treasures we can only dream of. Please welcome Pops from the illustrious Sailing Adventurers Guild. Applause thundered from the live studio audience, and Pops smiled widely, tipping his oversized sailor hat. Thank you, Billy. It's an honor to be here. Tell us, Pops, Billy began, leaning toward the microphone, what's one of the most thrilling dangers you've faced at sea? Pops launched into a captivating tale of sea serpents coiling around the mast of his ship, of monstrous waves crashing over the bow, and the bold attacks he executed to stave off these beasts. Every so often, he paused to thank the wiffle hen, patting the magical bird's head. She's saved me more than once with her random magical gifts, he said. Sometimes I'll rub a feather and get an extra strong punch. Another time, I got the power to breathe underwater for a minute. You never know what you're gonna get, but that's half the fun. The crowd oohed in fascination. Yet not all ears heard the show in wonder. In the shadows outside the studio, Hagatha crept, occasionally letting out a muffled cackle. She had circumvented the front entrance and was now scuttling down a narrow hallway, her thoughts laser-focused on her beloved. She could sense security presence, Van Helsing, no doubt, but her years of stealthy infiltration served her well. Clutched in her bony fingers was a twisted staff pulsating with necromantic energies. She was prepared to unleash horrors if necessary. Elsewhere in the same hallway, the Feathermaster's cultists were also sneaking in. They carried net launchers, vile potions, and small caged harpy chicks, fearsome creatures that, once released, would sow terror among any unprepared crowd. The Feathermaster himself followed, broad chest puffed out with confidence, his shimmering feather headdress making him look half divine, half deranged. Meanwhile, back on the broadcast, Billy was enthralled by Pop's stories. The child reporter's eyes lit up with genuine fascination at each new detail, questions effortlessly forming in that razor-sharp mind. Tell me, Billy asked, what drives you to keep seeking these adventures? Why not settle down, enjoy your riches, and live a peaceful life? Pops took a deep breath, for that question hit closer to home than Billy could know. I do it partly to prove myself. My father was a legendary adventurer, and I've always wanted to stand on the same mountaintop as he did. But mostly, he cast a tender glance toward Olive in the front row, it's because I want to be worthy of someone special. Someone who deserves a hero. Olive's heart pounded. She could barely contain her smile. Billy, sensing the tension, gently guided the moment. That's really admirable, Pops. Now, I have to ask, rumor says you've traveled alongside the famous Professor Van Helsing. Is that true? Oh, that guy, Pops muttered. His tone was half annoyed, half amused. He's not exactly in my guild. He's from the World Monster Hunter Guild. We've, crossed paths. He hunts monsters for a living. And I brawl them. So, yeah, there's a bit of a friendly rivalry, you might say. From his post behind the glass, Van Helsing perked up. Friendly rivalry? Humph, he whispered under his breath, folding his arms. Before Billy could follow up with another question, a thunderous crash echoed through the corridors of the station. The audience gasped as the door to the studio was smashed open. Standing in the doorway was Hagatha, wild hair flaring around her like a silver halo, staff swirling with dark magic. Lights flickered ominously as the ancient witch cackled. Pops, my darling. She screeched. I've come to make you mine. The producer nearly fainted. Billy's jaw dropped, but he was quick to recover his composure. This was, After all, not the first time his broadcast had been interrupted by some monstrous threat. He flicked off the microphone for a moment, to spare the audience the worst of the chaos, and motioned for security. Van Helsing wasted no time. He vaulted over the soundboard, black trench coat billowing behind him, top hat falling off in the scramble. "Hagatha!" he snarled, brandishing two glowing daggers. "Your reign ends here, witch. Moonlight daggers, strike of purity." Hagatha's lips curled into a snarl as luminous arcs of energy slashed the air in front of her. She leveled her staff and called out, "Necro barrier." A swirling mass of black and green coalesced in front of her, absorbing the brunt of Van Helsing's attack in a violent crackle. Gasps erupted from the audience, some fans shrieking, others cheering for the spectacle. Olive stood up, alarmed, while Pops rushed forward, placing himself between Hagatha and Olive. "Hagatha," he roared. "This is not the place or time to be messing with me." "Oh, but it is, my beloved," she cooed darkly. "What better place to prove my love than a public display for all to see?" Van Helsing pivoted, hurling a second volley of daggers. "Cursed witch, I will free the world from your vile existence." Suddenly, from behind Van Helsing, another group burst in, Feather Master's cultists in their hooded garb. They fired nets in all directions and unleashed small, screeching harpy chicks. The chicks dove at the overhead lights, shattering glass and sending sparks raining down. In marched the Feather Master himself, majestic in his headdress, arms flung wide in a dramatic gesture. "The Wiffle Hen shall be ours," he declared. "Feather Storm, Grand Tempest." He swung his arms and, from within his headdress, plumes of magically charged feathers shot forward like a hailstorm of darts. Technicians and radio staff dove for cover. Pops dove as well, shielding Olive with his body. Billy helped usher panicked audience members to safer corners of the studio. The entire station was descending into chaos, each faction with its own goal. Hagatha was fixated on Pops, the cultists were after the Wiffle Hen, and Van Helsing was dead set on killing Hagatha, but also, if possible, upstaging everyone in front of the microphones. As a half-dozen sharpened feathers flew at him, Pops rubbed the Wiffle Hen's feathers reflexively. "Please, gimme something good," he muttered. A burst of violet energy surged through his arms. Immediately, he felt an odd tingle. He thrust his fists forward, shouting, "Sailor's Cyclone Punch." A swirling vortex of wind erupted from his knuckles, catching the incoming feather barrage and sending them clattering to the floor. "That's my man," Olive said softly, pride lighting her eyes. Then, remembering her role as a healer, she rummaged through her potions, ready to treat any bystander wounded in the fray. Van Helsing squared off against Hagatha, daggers glinting in the flickering light. He dashed forward, boots hitting the floor in a quick rhythm. "Moonlight dagger barrage," he yelled, spinning with inhuman grace as a flurry of silver lace daggers tore through the air. Hagatha croaked a chant, swirling her staff. "Hollow minion summon." A monstrous undead knight materialized, shield clanging as the daggers impacted, some shattering on contact, others lodging into the creature's armor. The undead minion lurched forward, swinging a decaying sword at Van Helsing. The professor nimbly backflipped out of harm's way. He cursed under his breath, realizing Hagatha had grown stronger since their last skirmish. Meanwhile, the Feather Master advanced on Pops. "Hand over the Wiffle Hen, adventurer, and I might spare your pathetic life." His eyes gleamed with the mania of a zealot. Pops balled his fists. "You're gonna have to pry her from my cold dead hands," he barked. Then, to the Wiffle Hen, he whispered, "Come on, let's see if we can get another power-up." He rubbed a feather, bracing for the swirl of possibility. A rush of fiery energy coursed through his veins. Instantly, he could feel heat radiating off his arms. "Sailor's Inferno uppercut," he roared, lunging forward with a flame-wreathed punch. The Feather Master blocked with his gauntlet, which was reinforced with layered feathers that glowed with protective magic. Sparks cascaded across the studio as flame collided with magical feathers. The impact sent both men skidding backward, scorching the carpet and leaving a trail of cinders. Olive, heart pounding, scrambled to help frightened audience members evacuate. She used her whistles, letting out resonant calls that made the attacking harpy chicks hesitate. Under normal circumstances, she could calm them completely, but the mania of the cultists had driven the creatures into a frenzy. Still, she at least managed to direct them away from the innocent bystanders, guiding them up and over the rafters and away from the scurrying crowd. "Go on, you poor creatures," she murmured, voice thick with pity for the exploited animals. All the while, Billy Batson quietly observed from behind a console. The swirling chaos made his heart pound. The presence of so much magical energy, plus the desperation of those locked in combat, nearly took his breath away. A voice in the back of his mind, the voice of the wise old wizard, whispered that these were precisely the sorts of events that threatened all that was good in the world. As a mere boy, Billy had certain limitations, but if he spoke that magic word, he swallowed hard. Could he transform without giving away his identity to the entire station? He weighed the consequences swiftly. The city needed him, and more importantly, these brave people, Pops, Olive, even the misguided Van Helsing, needed his help. Captain Marvel was the mightiest mortal on Earth. Together, they could put an end to this madness. A net soared across the room, courtesy of a cultist, threatening to ensnare the wiffle hen. Pop dove, letting the net wrap him instead. Arg, he yelled, struggling as the cultists cackled. One of them rushed over with a savage grin to pry the bird away. Before the cultist could succeed, Olive swung her backpack like a club, whacking the cultist on the head. He toppled sideways, letting out a pained groan. "Hands off our friend," Olive growled. She then rummaged for a small alchemical pellet and flung it at the net, dissolving the ropes in a flurry of sizzling steam. Freeing himself, Pops shot her a grateful look. "Thanks, Olive. You're a lifesaver, as always." A swirling mass of necromantic energy exploded behind them. Hagatha's summoning had grown, an entire swarm of skeletal ravens screeching overhead. They dive-bombed the station, glass shattering on the control boards. Billy realized the building was moments away from total destruction if something wasn't done. He took a deep breath and, in that moment, resolved to take the risk. Ducking behind the battered console, Billy whispered the magic word that changed the course of battles and lives. Shazam! A resounding clap of thunder boomed through the station. Lightning arced from the ceiling, striking behind the console. The floor vibrated with unimaginable power, and in an instant, standing where Billy Batson had been was a tall, muscular man draped in a bright red uniform with a golden lightning bolt across the chest, a white cape flowing dramatically behind him. Captain Marvel had arrived. His voice rang out, authoritative, yet brimming with a sense of justice and warmth. "Everyone, stand down," he commanded, stepping forward. His presence was nearly blinding, radiant with magic. The swirling energies in the station seemed to recoil at his mere arrival. Pops blinked in disbelief. "Billy? You're Captain Marvel?" Even Van Helsing's battle with Hagatha paused momentarily as the witch's eyes went wide. Her undead knight stumbled back, shriveling under the radiant aura. Captain Marvel was, after all, the mightiest mortal on Earth, and to creatures of darkness, an almost existential threat. The Feather Master's face twisted with fury. "Captain Marvel. So the rumors are true. Evil flocks to you, they say. This changes nothing. I will claim your power for my own if I must." Captain Marvel frowned and pointed at the Feather Master. "Your tyranny ends here. You're endangering innocent people. I won't allow it." Then he turned to Hagatha. "And you, witch, you have threatened enough lives. Surrender." "Never." Hagatha shrieked, swirling her staff. Undead storm, corruption spire. A massive spiral of putrid energy tore through the floor, aiming to impale Captain Marvel. He raised an arm, bracing himself. The magical pillar crashed against his forearm, sparks and green flames erupting from the collision. The audience, or what was left of them, shrank back in terror. But after a few intense seconds, Captain Marvel emerged from the swirl unscathed. He exhaled, stepping through the shattered floor. "Your powers can't harm me," he declared. "I have the wisdom of Solomon, the strength of Hercules, the stamina of Atlas. It will take much more than that to bring me down." Van Helsing, seizing the moment of Hagatha's distraction, slashed at her with a dagger. "Enough talk." Van Helsing's sanctified cleave. The blade glowed white-hot, slicing through the undead knight's armor. Hagatha skittered back, only narrowly avoiding a direct hit. The entire studio was now a war zone. Electricity crackled, the Feather Master's cultists fired nets and poison darts, and the skeletal ravens swarmed overhead. Olive played crowd control, ushering people out, using her potions and whistles to direct the harpy chicks away from the worst of the fighting. Pops and the Feather Master slammed blow after blow into one another, each collision sending shockwaves through the battered station interior. At last, Captain Marvel decided to shift the tide decisively. He sped toward the cultists at superhuman speed, disarming them of their net launchers in a flurry of movements too fast for the naked eye. "Time to put a stop to this," he declared. "Divine thunderclap." He clapped his hands together, unleashing a deafening thunderwave that knocked every cultist off their feet, scattering them against the walls like rag dolls. The Feather Master, reeling from the quake, hammered his fists together. "I will not be undone by a child's trick." Feather Master's celestial dive. In a flash, he soared upward, harnessing the power of enchanted feathers to levitate. Then he swooped down, headdress blazing with golden radiance, intending to crash into Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel calmly braced, clasping the Feather Master's hands mid-plunge. The impact gouged the floor, sending bits of tile and wood into the air. But the mightiest mortal held strong. "You've caused enough harm," he said, voice echoing with righteous anger. Then, with a single heave, Captain Marvel tossed the Feather Master across the studio. The cult leader slammed into the wall, coughing from the brutal collision. All the while, near the shattered microphone stands, Pops engaged in a desperate, swirling brawl against two cultists who had singled him out. "Sailor's Fury Barrage," he shouted, delivering a flurry of rapid-fire punches. The cultists tried to parry, but Pop's arms bulged with raw power, each strike hitting like a cannon shot. They crumpled, leaving Pops winded but victorious. He scanned the chaos, spotting Hagatha cornering Olive near the back of the studio. "No," Pops gasped. Indeed, Hagatha had circled around, forcing Olive to retreat into a narrower hallway with no exit. Olive raised one of her potion bottles threateningly, though she knew that direct confrontation with a powerful witch was no small matter. "Stay back," Olive warned, trying to keep her voice from trembling. Hagatha cackled, staff swirling. "You stole his heart, you wretched girl. Now I'll take yours, literally if I must." Pops tore across the studio, refusing to strike a woman, as his code forbade it, but also determined to protect Olive. He rubbed the Whiffle hen's feathers frantically, praying for just the right ability. The bird let out an agitated squawk as the fourth rub in under 10 minutes took effect. A crackle of energy danced around Pop's fists. "Lightning lasso," he shouted, punching the air. Tendrils of electric energy coiled outward like a rope, entangling Hagatha's staff. She hissed and yanked back, unleashing a burst of vile magic that threatened to surge along the lasso straight back to Pops. Unable to bear the idea of harming a woman, even one as wicked as Hagatha, Pops made a lightning-fast decision. He released the energy prematurely, letting it dissipate before it could trap her fully. But that gave Hagatha just enough time to rip free. She aimed a blast of dark power at him, sending him staggering into the corridor's wall with an agonizing spasm of necromantic pain. He winced, back pressed against the cracked plaster, as Hagatha glided closer. "My dear," she purred, "why do you resist me so? Together we could rule." A sudden voice cut through the tension. "Cease, Hagatha." It was Professor Van Helsing, sprinting toward them. "Your evil ends tonight." He reached into his coat, brandishing a short stake that glimmered with a pulsating silver light. "Moonlight stake, final judgment," he proclaimed, hurling it with all his might. The stake soared through the air, trailing a streak of argent brilliance. Hagatha spun, trying to conjure a barrier, but Olive, seizing the moment, blew a piercing note on one of her specialized whistles. It disoriented Hagatha for a split second, just long enough for the stake to bury itself in her shoulder. Hagatha shrieked, staggering in agony. A swirl of darkness seemed to leak from the wound. She dropped her staff, clutching the sizzling stake that radiated holy power. Van Helsing loomed closer, eyes lit with fervor, determined to finish the job. But in a last-ditch effort, Hagatha snarled an incantation, conjuring a thick swirl of black fog that enveloped her form. "Pops," she cried out, voice guttural with pain. "I'll be back, my beloved." And in a swirl of curling smoke, she vanished, leaving the stake to clatter to the ground, the witch herself gone. Van Helsing bared his teeth, furious at the missed kill. "No," he roared, slamming a fist into the wall. "She escaped me again." Olive rushed to Pop's side. "Are you okay?" She pressed a healing salve to his shoulders and gently rubbed, ignoring the bruises. Yeah, he groaned, forcing a smile. "Thanks, Olive." He bowed his head slightly toward Van Helsing. "Thank you, too." Van Helsing looked down, torn between anger at Hagatha's escape and some satisfaction at having at least wounded her. Finally, he extended a hand toward Pops. "She'll not go far," the monster hunter said quietly. "I'll find her again." Pops grasped his hand in a quick, understanding gesture. There would be time for rivalry later, but in this moment, they were allies in a common cause. Back in the main studio, Captain Marvel had subdued most of the cultists. Feather Master, however, refused to yield. Bruised and pinned, he still sneered at the mighty hero. "I will never stop. The Whiffle hen belongs to me. The entire world belongs to me." Captain Marvel shook his head solemnly. "You want power for its own sake, but you've lost sight of the simple good in the world. Your tyranny ends tonight." With that, Captain Marvel hoisted the Feather Master high into the air. Then, With a controlled slam, he planted the cult leader onto the floor, not hard enough to kill but certainly enough to break any illusions of immediate escape. The Feather Master's headdress of feathers scattered across the floor, like the fallen remains of his ambition. It was over. The station was in tatters, but the immediate threat had passed. The wounded were tended by Olive, and soon, the city guard, summoned by alert citizens, rushed in to secure the area and apprehend the dazed cultists. Captain Marvel turned to Pops and Olive, who came stumbling out of the corridor, supporting each other. Pops had his arm around Olive's shoulder, and the wiffle hen balanced precariously on his other shoulder, ruffled but alive. "You fought bravely," Captain Marvel commended. "Both of you. I'm sorry your interview was ruined." Pops chuckled wryly. "It's not your fault, Captain." He squinted, glancing at Captain Marvel's face. "Hard to believe you're actually that kid reporter, Billy. But it does explain a lot." Captain Marvel smiled. "If possible, I'd appreciate it if you kept my identity to yourselves. We don't want to cause more trouble than there already is. Evil is drawn to me like a moth to flame." Olive, kneeling beside a wounded technician, nodded. "We understand. We've got enough trouble already." Then, Pop's eyes went wide in realization. There had been something he intended to do on air, something that took more courage than facing any monster. Billy, Captain Marvel, saw the look of panic on Pop's face and gently guided him toward the battered microphone, hooking it back into the half-sparking console. He gave a slight wink, flipping some switches to rejoin the broadcast that had somehow miraculously stayed connected despite the chaos. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Marvel said into the microphone, his voice calm and reassuring, "I apologize for the interruption. The threat has been contained. This is a friend of Billy Batson speaking. We'll have to cut this short, but there's one last piece of important news that Pops would like to share." Stunned silence fell over the small crowd of onlookers, the radio staff, and even the city guards who had come to secure the scene. Pops cleared his throat, adrenaline still coursing through him from the battle. He noticed Olive standing just a few feet away, her beautiful face covered in a bit of soot, her hair disheveled from the frantic rescue efforts, but still radiant as ever. His heart pounded in his chest. This was the moment. "Oh, Olive," he began, voice trembling. He turned away from the microphone for a moment, focusing only on her. "You know me better than anyone. I'm a simple man, reckless, maybe too quick to swing a punch, but with all that's happened tonight, I realize more than ever that life is short and I can't keep waiting. I love you more than I can express. Will you marry me?" He dropped to one knee, a bit painful given all the bruises, but he pressed on. Olive's eyes went wide, tears threatening to spill over. It was everything she had secretly hoped for, though she still put on her playful, flirty front. "Oh, Pops," she whispered, heart fluttering. For a fleeting moment, her thoughts drifted to all they had endured, ancient witches, monstrous cults, braving sea serpents, forging alliances with magical beasts. All for the day she'd be sure that he loved her unconditionally. She smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Yes. Of course, yes." She flung her arms around him, ignoring the bits of rubble and broken equipment around them. Applause broke out from the stunned audience members who remained, from the city guard who had parted the chaos, and from the battered staff. Van Helsing gave a reluctant smile, tipping his hat toward them, though he couldn't hide his slight envy that the glory tonight belonged not to him but to these two lovers. Captain Marvel pressed a single finger to his ear, listening. The station lines were still open, meaning the city was hearing this emotional proposal. He smiled. "Well, there you have it, folks. Love conquers all. This is your friend Captain Marvel wishing you a wonderful evening, and, Shazam!" A sudden crack of thunder. Lightning flashed again, and in a blink, the mighty hero was gone, replaced by Billy Batson, who now slipped away behind a cloud of dust, hoping no one had noticed his abrupt re-entry. Most of the staff were too busy cheering Pops and Olive to pay close attention, and those who saw it simply stood in awe, swearing themselves to secrecy. The immediate crisis resolved, the city guard took the cultists into custody. The Feathermaster, stripped of his headdress and power, glared daggers at them all, promising under his breath to return and enact vengeance. Hagatha had fled, and though wounded, her obsession surely wouldn't end here. Van Helsing, for his part, silently vowed to track her down wherever she went, even if the credit for tonight's victory didn't belong to him. As the paramedics and cleanup crews arrived, Billy, his voice returned to the sunny timbre of a child, addressed everyone. "Thank you all for tuning in to the Billy Batson Show. We'll be back soon with more amazing stories from the greatest heroes around the world. For now, stay safe. That's all, folks." He cut the feed, and the broadcast ended. The battered studio was filled with the hum of relief and excited murmuring. Pops cradled Olive against him, pressing his forehead to hers. It wasn't quite the proposal I'd planned, but... She laughed through her tears. I wouldn't have it any other way, my hero. Van Helsing approached, clearing his throat. Ahem. Congratulations, he said gruffly, doffing his hat. I suppose you'll be needing a best man? If you can, forgive all that talk of rivalry. Pops smiled. We'll see, Van Helsing. Maybe we'll let you give a toast or two. Their eyes met, and in that moment, both realized that their competition had forged a strange bond of mutual respect. Through the shattered windows, dawn's first rays peeked, the sky blushing pink and gold as though to herald a new chapter. Billy, standing off to the side, stuffed his hands in his pockets and looked up, the wizard's voice echoing once more in his mind. Despite the chaos, or perhaps because of it, Billy felt a renewal of purpose. Being Captain Marvel wasn't just a burden, it was also a gift that let him witness beauty among the chaos. And so, in that battered radio station, with broken electronics, scattered feathers, shards of black magic evaporating in the air, and battered heroes and bystanders all around, a small piece of the world found its balance again. The forces of darkness, though persistent, had been beaten back for another day. Pops and Olive had taken a crucial step forward in their relationship, proving that love and pride could, indeed, push people toward the impossible. Van Helsing, though frustrated at Hagatha's escape, had also felt the warmth of camaraderie. Perhaps next time, he might get the glory he longed for, or perhaps he'd discover something more meaningful than glory. Feathermaster, dethroned and bound, glowered at the rising sun, but in his heart, he plotted a future beyond these chains. As for Hagatha, somewhere out there, nursing her wounds, she no doubt plotted another dramatic and destructive attempt at winning Pop's affections, or eliminating those in her way. Billy Batson, the bravest child on Earth, understood that new threats would arise. Evil was always drawn to the power of Shazam. But armed with the wisdom of Solomon, the strength of Hercules, the stamina of Atlas, the power of Zeus, the courage of Achilles, and the speed of Mercury, he was ready. And for now, at least, Gateport City could rest, its people reassured that heroes walk among them, even if they're sometimes just children with big imaginations and bigger hearts. As the sun climbed higher, the survivors emerged from the station, blinking in the fresh daylight. Despite the wreckage, a sense of triumph filled the air, like the end of a grand performance on a cosmic stage. Pops gently lifted Olive's hand, kissing her knuckles before they stepped onto the sidewalk, greeted by a mixture of curious onlookers and concerned officials. Life moved on. The world turned. Yet each of the five who had converged that night, Pops, Olive, Hagatha, Van Helsing, and Feathermaster, had changed in some way. Pops shed some of his doubt, learning that he didn't have to become the greatest adventurer in the world to deserve Olive's love. Their bond was far beyond that. Olive learned that no matter how busy she was healing the world's magical creatures, she still had the freedom to accept joy for herself. Van Helsing realized that there was more to heroism than credit or fame. There was a bond formed in the crucible of conflict, and an understanding that sometimes, victory is shared. Feathermaster was forced to confront a humiliating defeat that might one day challenge his cultish convictions. And Hagatha, though absent, had discovered that her blind obsession led her to yet another catastrophe. Perhaps even her ancient heart might one day reflect on what love truly meant. Through it all, Billy Batson walked away with one more story to tell, one that, if spun correctly, would undoubtedly rocket his show's ratings into the stratosphere. But he'd omit certain details about a certain magic word. Some secrets were better kept, especially when the fate of the world might depend on them. For now, the city could enjoy the peace. A swirl of enchantment lingered in the aftermath of Captain Marvel's presence, and though future storms would surely come, these heroes, battered but unbroken, stood ready. The last swirl of dust settled in the radio station, leaving behind a battered set and a sense of conclusion. Danger had passed. Love had triumphed. Pride and imagination had carried them all to new heights. And in the fresh morning light, a proposal once intended for the radio had instead rung out with even greater power, forging a new path forward for two hearts destined to sail the seas together, come what may.